I'm Ellen Tate, 25 now, but I still remember standing outside my parents' home in Fargo, North Dakota, 5 winters ago. Snow drifted down as their words sliced through me, sharper than the freezing air. Don't ever come back here. Their voices were ice, final and unforgiving. I was only 20, hopelessly in love with a man they couldn't stand, and I left that night with my boots crunching in the snow and betrayal pounding in my chest. They expected I'd fail and return begging for forgiveness, but I never did. That moment set my life spinning, driving me into a storm both real and emotional, forcing me to fight just to keep going. Their rejection was only the beginning. Lies, heartbreak, and one terrifying night in that blizzard nearly destroyed me, yet I refused to give in. 5 years later, they came to regret every cruel word. Stay with me to learn how I turned their rejection into power, and how they eventually paid for pushing me away. If family betrayal ever shattered you, tell me your story in the comments. Tap subscribe and follow my journey. Growing up in Fargo, I always felt eclipsed by my sister, Teresa. My parents, Patricia and Harold Neal, managed our modest household like a stage for their ambitions. Mom, with her cutting remarks and endless demands, expected me to earn a degree from some elite college and marry a man who met her checklist of success: a doctor, a lawyer, someone with status. Dad, quieter but no less controlling, stood beside her, his steady nods sealing every decision. Their vision for me was simple: a polished daughter they could parade around at Sunday service and brag about at block parties. But that wasn't who I was. I was Ellen, the one who never quite matched their blueprint. My sister, Teresa Porter, was everything they wanted. At 30, she held a law degree, commanded a corner office at a respected firm, and was engaged to the kind of man Mom had always imagined for her. Teresa's got her life together, Mom would say with that soft pride in her voice, while I sat across the table at 18, fading into the background. Teresa's success loomed over me like a shadow I could never escape. Every A- I brought home earned the same refrain: your sister never accepted less than perfection. I'd tighten my jaw, eyes fixed on my dinner plate, wishing I could vanish entirely. Then Dad would add his quiet echo: you just need to focus, Ellen, as if I wasn't already giving everything I had. Their constant comparisons hollowed me out, leaving an ache that whispered I'd never measure up. High school became my silent rebellion. ChatGPT Skazal, I started sneaking out to the small cafes and record shops around town, anywhere I could exist without feeling their constant criticism. That's where I met David Reed, 25, with rough hands from long days at the garage, and a calm kind of confidence that pulled me in instantly. David worked at an auto shop near the outskirts of Fargo, fixing cars and talking about the business he dreamed of owning someday. He wasn't what my parents had imagined for me: no degree, no refined manners, but he made me feel like I could finally breathe. We'd park his old truck by the Red River and trade stories until the world felt simple again. With David, I wasn't the shadow of Teresa. I was just Ellen. When I told Mom about him, her expression froze. "A mechanic?" she said sharply. "You're supposed to aim higher than that." Dad stayed quiet, but every look he gave carried disapproval. They'd haul me to dinners with Teresa and her fiancé, pointing out her stability, her bright future, a future I was supposed to want. I tried to tell them David was driven, that he had goals, but Mom cut me off with her voice like ice. "He's beneath you." Anger flushed through me, and I fought back, but it didn't matter. To them, David was nothing more than a wrong turn. Teresa tried to smooth things over, murmuring they only want the best for you, yet her words felt rehearsed, detached. She'd worked too hard for their pride to risk losing it, so I stopped expecting anyone to take my side. Between their cold judgment and David's quiet warmth, I made my choice. He became my escape, the only place I felt like myself. After my late shifts at the diner downtown, David would pick me up, and we'd sit for hours talking about a future untouched by my parents' expectations. Those nights stretched longer and longer as I tuned out Mom's lectures and Dad's weary sighs. The more time I spent with David, the further I drifted from home, and the more the air between us all tightened with tension. One night, I came home quietly and heard them in the living room. Mom's voice, sharp but hushed, cut through the silence. "She's throwing her life away. That boy's nothing but trouble." Dad muttered something about needing to be stricter, his tone low, resigned. I froze in the doorway, unseen, my pulse thudding as I realized how little they believed in me. To them, I wasn't their daughter anymore, just a failure in progress. By the time I turned 20, I was finished trying to earn their approval. I wanted something that belonged entirely to me, even if it meant breaking away. I didn't know then that the decision to choose love over obedience would ignite the fight that changed my life. Being with David was the first time I felt free to exist on my own terms. He wasn't perfect, grease under his nails, rent overdue, a dream that still lived on paper. But he believed in me in a way no one else ever had. I started spending nights at his tiny apartment above the garage where he worked. The place was cramped, the paint peeling, the couch sagging. But to me, it felt like a world without judgment. I'd throw a few things into a bag, tell Mom I had a late study session, and disappear into the night, straight into the only life that felt like mine. Every time I slipped out, I could almost feel Mom's disappointment humming through the unanswered calls, her silence filled with judgment. Dad didn't call at all. His quiet disapproval came through in the long, heavy sighs that said more than any lecture could. Teresa, of course, noticed something was wrong. "You're playing with fire, Ellen," she warned one afternoon as we sat in her car, the morning light spilling through the windshield. She'd caught me sneaking home after a night with David, my hair still tangled, my face flushed with exhaustion and defiance. I brushed her off. Her words carried no weight anymore. Teresa never challenged our parents. She stayed in their good graces, the golden child, and I was done living in her shadow. That weekend, I made a choice I couldn't take back. I packed a duffel with my clothes, a few dog-eared books, and some old photos, and told David I was moving in. His whole face lit up, and for a moment, I believed we could carve out a small piece of happiness far from my parents' reach. But in a town like Fargo, secrets never stay quiet for long. A woman from Mom's book club saw me hauling boxes into David's apartment, and by dinner time, the news had made its way to my parents' table. Mom stood by the counter, her knuckles white around a dish towel. "You're living with that mechanic," she snapped, her voice slicing through the air. I froze, fork suspended mid-bite. Dad stared across the table, his eyes steeled with disappointment I'd never seen before. "Ellen, is it true?" he asked, his voice low, but every word hit like a blow. My pulse thundered as I nodded. There was no sense pretending anymore. The room erupted. Mom's fury spilled out, each sentence landing like a slap. "You're destroying your life. He's nothing, Ellen, nothing." I stood my ground, my voice trembling but steady. "He's more than you'll ever understand. You don't even know him," I shot back. But before I could say more, Dad's palm slammed against the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Enough," he barked. "You're humiliating us." The words stung more than I expected. Embarrassing them. That's what it came down to. Not my choices, not my happiness, just how I made them look to the world. Teresa sat frozen, her gaze locked on her plate, pretending she wasn't there, offering me nothing. The walls of that house felt like they were closing in, every familiar corner suddenly foreign. Outside, the wind screamed through the streets, and snow pressed against the windows in heavy white sheets. The fight built until it couldn't anymore. Mom pointed toward the door, her face tight with fury. "If you choose him, you're finished here. Don't ever come back." Her voice was cold, absolute. Dad stood behind her, jaw clenched, saying nothing to stop her. I waited, hoped, for him to speak, to calm her down, to take my side just once. But silence was all he gave me. Something inside me cracked. My chest burned with anger and heartbreak, the kind that leaves no room for tears. "Fine," I managed, forcing my voice steady. "I don't need you. I grabbed the duffel bag I'd packed earlier and headed for my coat, my heartbeat pounding louder than their voices behind me. Teresa trailed after me, whispering urgently, "Ellen, just apologize. They'll calm down." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "They don't want me, Teresa. They want their version of me." She tried to touch my arm, but I stepped back. There was nothing left to say, not after what I'd just heard. The moment I stepped outside, the cold slapped me hard. Snow whipped through the air, catching in my hair as I trudged down the porch steps. The lights from the house glowed warm behind me, mocking how unwelcome I suddenly was. The loneliness pressed down heavier than the storm itself. I adjusted my bag over my shoulder and started walking toward David's apartment, unsure what tomorrow would bring, only that I couldn't go back. Living with David above the auto shop felt like breathing again. The apartment was tiny, creaking floors, one drafty window overlooking the street. But it was ours. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under judgment. David came home each night smelling faintly of grease and cold air, his easy smile melting away the ache that still lingered from leaving home. We'd cook together, burning toast, laughing until our stomachs hurt, making plans for the day his garage would have his name on the sign. For a while, I believed we could make it. To help with bills, I picked up shifts at a corner store downtown, stacking shelves and ringing up customers until closing. It didn't pay much, but I tucked away every spare dollar, dreaming of a little house we could call our own. David worked late most nights, taking on extra repairs, always chasing that dream that somehow felt close enough to touch. "It's for our future," David would tell me, pressing a kiss to my forehead before heading out the door. I believed him completely, holding on to that promise of the life we were building together. Every so often, Teresa would call, her tone cautious, as if she were afraid to break something fragile. "Are you okay, Ellen?" she asked once. "I'm fine," I replied quickly, cutting the conversation short before she could turn it into another lecture. I didn't need her sympathy or Mom's disapproval echoing through her words. I had David, and that was supposed to be enough. But 3 months in, the cracks began to show. David started coming home later, glancing at his phone more often, brushing off my questions with easy smiles. At first, I told myself it was just work, that he was pushing himself to get ahead. Then one evening, a message appeared on my phone, an anonymous note on Facebook Messenger that made my blood run cold. "Your boyfriend's not who you think he is." There were just enough details, his late nights, the places he'd been, to make my stomach knot. I stared at the screen, heart racing, wondering who would send something like that. A jealous coworker? A neighbor with too much time? I didn't know, but the doubt dug in deep. After that, I started seeing what I'd tried to ignore. The hushed phone calls taken outside, the quick end of conversations when I entered the room. One night, I found a receipt crumpled in his jacket pocket, a coffee shop we'd never been to, dated for a night he'd said he was working late. My mind spiraled, replaying every excuse, every glance that didn't quite meet my eyes. Nausea crawled up my throat as I realized how much I'd overlooked, how much I'd sacrificed. I'd given up my family, my home, everything. And now, even David felt like he was slipping away. I needed the truth, but deep down, I was terrified of what it might be. That night, I couldn't take the uncertainty any longer. When David finally came through the door, his hair was tousled and there was a faint trace of perfume on his shirt, a scent that wasn't mine. I stood in the kitchen, arms folded tightly, forcing my voice to stay calm, though my heart felt like it might give out. "Who were you with tonight?" I asked. His eyes flickered, just for a second, before he gave a short laugh. "Just the guys from the shop," he said easily, reaching into the fridge for a beer. I didn't let it go. I told him about the anonymous message, the receipt, the phone calls that always seemed to pull him outside. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by irritation. "You're imagining things, Ellen. You're paranoid," he snapped. "I'm not doing anything wrong." But his voice carried that hollow ring that comes from lies spoken too often. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Something inside me simply settled. It was the calm that comes after a breaking point. "I'm done," I said quietly. His mouth opened, ready to protest, but I didn't let him. "I trusted you. I left everything behind for you." He reached out, trying to close the distance, but I stepped away before he could touch me. I couldn't stay in that cramped apartment that now felt poisoned by betrayal. I pulled out the same duffel bag I'd used the night I left home, threw in my clothes, and walked out. David called after me, his voice echoing down the hall, but I didn't turn back. Outside, the streets were empty, the cold biting at my skin. The air smelled of snow and loneliness. I had nowhere to go, no family to return to, no safety net left. Just the heavy ache of betrayal pressing down on me as I walked into the night. That winter in Fargo was the coldest I'd ever known. I trudged through the snow, my bag dragging on my shoulder, wind slicing through my jacket. My savings from the corner store were barely enough to get me through a week. Still, I kept walking, each step a battle against the storm and the hopelessness clawing at me. By the time I reached the bus depot on Main Avenue, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. The small waiting area was dim, nearly deserted except for 2 stranded travelers huddled near the heater. My fingers ached as I rubbed them together for warmth and sank onto a hard plastic bench. The weak hum of the heater barely reached me. I had enough money for a few nights at a cheap motel. After that, I didn't know. Panic crept up my spine as I stared at the swirling snow outside, realizing that in chasing love, I'd lost everything else. I'd already left my parents behind, walked away from David, and now I was standing in the middle of nowhere with no one left to call. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, its dim glow flickering against the bus depot's cold walls. Maybe, I thought, time had softened them. Maybe they'd let me come home, even just for one night. When Mom answered, her voice was sharp enough to cut through the static. "What do you want, Ellen?" My throat tightened. "I'm stuck, Mom. It's bad out here. Can I—" She didn't let me finish. "Don't come back. You made your choice." Her words hit me like the night she first told me to leave, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. I tried calling Dad next, clinging to some last shred of hope. "Ellen, you heard your mother," he said, his tone cold and final. "Don't call again." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, the reflection of my face warped and pale in the glass. Outside, the storm howled louder, snow pressing thick against the depot doors. I sank back onto the bench, my duffel bag at my feet, feeling smaller than I ever had. David was gone. My family was gone. I had nothing left but the ache in my chest and the silence that filled the space where love used to be. The few travelers scattered around avoided my eyes, lost in their own troubles. I pulled my coat tighter, trying to trap what little warmth remained, but the loneliness pressed down so hard I could barely breathe. I don't know how long I sat like that. Maybe minutes, maybe hours, the storm's relentless roar drowning out every thought. I was close to giving up, wondering if I'd make it through the night, when a voice broke through the hum of the heater. "You okay, miss?" I looked up. A man in a bus driver's uniform stood near me, his badge reading Gregory Lane. He looked to be in his 40s, with a lined face and kind, steady eyes. I shook my head, unable to find words. Gregory glanced toward the storm outside, and then back at me. "You can't stay here all night. Depot closes soon." I mumbled something about not having anywhere to go. He didn't press, just nodded once and picked up his keys. "Come on, I'm off duty. Let's get you somewhere safe." I hesitated, instinctively cautious, but there was something calm and genuine in his voice. I followed him out into the blizzard toward his parked bus, its engine still humming with warmth. The streets were nearly deserted, blanketed in snow, but he drove slowly, carefully, until we reached a small inn at the edge of town. "They've got rooms, cheap ones," he said, putting the bus in park. He turned to me, his tone gentle but firm. "Get yourself settled. You look like you need a break. We all do sometimes." My throat burned with gratitude as I whispered "thank you," my voice cracking in the cold air. Then I stepped down into the snow, the wind biting at my face, but for the first time that night, I didn't feel entirely lost. The inn's neon sign flickered weakly through the swirling snow, a pale glow against the storm. As Gregory's bus disappeared down the street, I stood there for a moment, the cold biting at my skin, but a small spark of hope warming something deep inside me. That night in the blizzard marked the start of everything new. I realized I couldn't depend on anyone anymore. Not my parents, not David. From that point on, I'd have to rely on myself. The place Gregory brought me to wasn't home, but it was a refuge. I had only a few $100s left from my job at the corner store, just enough to cover a week's rent. It wasn't much, but it was something to build from. The pain of being cast out and betrayed lingered like a shadow, yet I refused to let it break me. I needed to move forward, to prove, to them and to myself, that I could survive without anyone's approval. I thought of Wendy Larson, my best friend from high school. She'd always been the kind of person who could find light in the darkest corners. I texted her, my fingers trembling from the cold. "Ellen." Her reply came almost instantly. "Where are you?" Even in a short message, I could feel her concern. I told her everything, my parents shutting me out, David's lies, the storm that nearly swallowed me whole. She didn't hesitate. "Come to my place. We'll figure it out." By the next morning, I was standing in her cozy, one-bedroom apartment, filled with thrifted furniture and the smell of fresh coffee. Wendy pressed a mug into my hands and then handed me a small roll of cash, maybe $200. "It's not much, but it's yours," she said firmly. I tried to refuse, but she shook her head, her expression fierce. "You're not alone, Ellen, not anymore." With her help, I found a small studio on the edge of Fargo, peeling paint, a leaky faucet, a radiator that rattled like it was haunted. But it was mine. Rent drained almost everything I had left, so I held on to my job at the corner store, picking up extra shifts wherever I could. The days were long and the work thankless, but it kept me going. Wendy stopped by often, sometimes with greasy takeout, sometimes just to sit with me. On the nights when I looked like I might fall apart, she'd grin and say, "You're tougher than you think, you know that." Her faith in me became the small fire that kept me from slipping back into despair. I wanted more than survival. I'd always had a head for numbers, so I signed up for evening classes in accounting at the local community college. Balancing school and work was exhausting, but for the first time in years, I had direction. I'd stay late in the library, surrounded by old textbooks, imagining a future where I didn't have to live paycheck to paycheck. My instructor, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a surprising warmth beneath them, handed back a quiz one night with a smile. "You've got real potential, Ellen," she said. The words lodged in my chest, proof that maybe I wasn't the failure my parents believed me to be. Then, out of nowhere, Teresa reached out. A letter arrived first, her handwriting neat and deliberate. "I'm sorry for how things went," she wrote, the tone careful but sincere. Tucked inside was $50. "It's from me, not Mom or Dad. You don't need them. You're stronger than you think." A week later, my phone lit up with her name. "I just want to help, Ellen," Teresa said softly when she finally called. No strings attached. I thanked her, but my guard stayed up. I couldn't bring myself to trust family again, not after the way my parents' voices still echoed in my memory, sharp and final. I used the money she'd sent to buy groceries, but ignored her follow-up messages. I needed distance, space to build something that belonged entirely to me. Days blurred into weeks, then months. My life settled into a rhythm, early mornings at work, classes at night, exhaustion filling every space in between. Still, determination pushed me forward. Wendy stood beside me through all of it, steady, loyal, and endlessly encouraging. One night, sitting cross-legged on her couch with a half-empty pizza box between us, she raised her soda can and grinned. "To you, Ellen," she said. "You're doing it." For the first time in months, I smiled. A real one. I wasn't healed, not completely. The scars of my parents' rejection and David's betrayal still ran deep, but I was rebuilding, piece by piece. My tiny apartment, my long shifts, my late-night studying, all of it was proof that I could stand on my own. I didn't know what the future held, but for once, I trusted myself to face it. 5 years later, that trust had carried me further than I ever imagined. I wasn't the same broken girl who had fled through a snowstorm or cried alone in a bus depot. I'd become someone stronger, someone capable. After finishing my accounting program, I landed a position at a large firm in Fargo, managing accounts for corporate clients. My desk overlooked the skyline, a daily reminder of how far I'd climbed. I'd also found love again, unexpectedly, with Ronald Cole, a high school history teacher I met at a coffee shop. Ronald was calm and grounded, his humor gentle, his presence easy. Evenings were spent cooking together, planning weekend hikes, and sharing dreams that finally felt attainable. For the first time, life wasn't about surviving, it was about living. My parents, Patricia and Harold, hadn't fared so well. One spring, Teresa texted me, her tone cautious but hopeful. "Mom and Dad want to see you," she wrote. "They're sorry." I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mixture of anger and detachment. Sorry? After all those years? After casting me out in a blizzard? A week later, a letter arrived from Teresa, carrying their apology, their wish to meet, their claim that they missed me. I didn't respond. When she called, I kept it brief. "They made their choice, Teresa," I said, my voice steady. "They don't get to undo it. I had spent too long rebuilding what they destroyed. I wasn't about to let their regret drag me back into the past. They'd lost me for good, left behind in that silent house with nothing but remorse." As for David, his story ended the way mine began. Wendy told me he'd finally opened that garage he dreamed about, but it collapsed within a year. He'd taken out loans he couldn't repay, and the business fell apart, just like the lies he once told me. Bad choices and worse luck followed David everywhere. He ended up alone, living in a shabby apartment with no one left to call, no family, no friends. Wendy mentioned once that he'd asked about me, his voice heavy with regret, but I'd blocked his number long ago. He couldn't reach me, and I preferred it that way. His betrayal had once shattered me, but it also became the reason I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. While I kept moving forward, David stayed trapped in the ruins of his own decisions, haunted by everything he'd thrown away. His regret belonged to him, not to me. When I think back to that blizzard, I realize it was the moment everything changed. I don't regret walking out into the storm that night. Back then, I was a girl chasing approval from people who never truly saw me, a daughter desperate to please her parents, a girlfriend clinging to a man who lied. Leaving them was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was also what set me free. Every long shift, every late night with my textbooks, every lonely meal in that tiny apartment built the woman I am now. I learned to measure my worth by my own effort, not by the validation of people too blind to see it. My parents' rejection and David's deceit hurt, but they taught me something invaluable. I didn't need them to define me. I had Ronald, I had Wendy, and I had myself. My life became proof that choosing yourself is never a mistake, even when it costs you everything. If I've learned anything, it's this: protect your worth. Don't beg for love from those incapable of giving it. My parents chose pride over their daughter, and now they live surrounded by silence. David chose temptation and ended up with nothing. I chose myself and built a life I'm proud of. Independence isn't easy. It's filled with sleepless nights, empty wallets, and moments where doubt creeps in. But it's still better than staying chained to people who diminish you. Walking away takes courage, but it gives you a strength you never knew you had. To anyone listening, remember this: you don't need to hold on to those who hurt you. Forge your own path, even if it feels lonely at first. It's worth it. Thank you for listening to my story. It means everything to share this journey with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? What have you learned about walking away or standing up for yourself? Share your experiences below. Your voice matters, just like mine did when I finally chose to begin again.